Hey everybody, today I walk you through the process of making a big collage paper that I can then use for future projects, for collages, original pages, card making, whatever I like to use it for. I'm going to make that whole sheet a little bit more messy, and I'm starting out by applying acrylic paint through a stencil. And I picked the Wenn Ihr acrylic paint. It's quite heavy and it's also the glossiest paint I think I have, and I am picking this glossy paint because this will resist any liquid mediums that I'm going to put over the top, and then it pops up a little bit more from that background and gives me some interesting textures. The paper that I'm working on is some thin newsprint paper from Canson. I love using that for collage. It's also a paper I pick when I need something to lay down under a project so I don't get a messy desk, and then I can use these papers also for collage. It's a really nice, it has a really nice feel to it, and I love that it's so thin. And yeah, I just switched this stencil around and grab my kitchen roll and just put it onto the paper as well, so I get some different textures. I'm mixing up the stencil textures I'm using. I've used our Marks number 2 stencil first, and here I'm using one of the mini marks. I cut the stencil into 3 so I have them all separated, and I really like just mix up stuff, and this paper is going to be very messy and with all kinds of different textures, and I really can't wait to use it. I think I mainly will use it on original pages, maybe on tags or artist trading cards as a background. That might also be quite nice. It's always good to have such papers laying around, because if you don't have much time to create, it's always handy to have something that's prepped and you don't have to take out all your stuff. You have something ready to go and you don't need much more. Maybe a glue, maybe a little bit of crayons to make marks and a focal point. And that's what I like about pre-prepped stuff. On Saturday I'm going to make a video for my members, and we will make a bunch of art journal pages, of small art journal pages, because during our holidays I was not able to create that much and I have no projects left for our shop blog, and I need to make some just to fill the days and the empty days where we have just with some creative inspiration. And that's what I'm going to do in my members video on Saturday. We are making some art journal pages using stuff that's already prepared, so it does not take a lot of time, but I recently already worked in that way. Well, I do this regularly, but I so enjoy that because it's so relaxing and easy. You don't have to put out all the stuff. You just have boxes with some collage paper, some focal images. I grab a few crayons maybe, or a pencil, and that's it, and that's so easy, and that just gives me a little bit of creative time. I've pulled out one of our stamp sets. This is our Pencil Max 8 stamp set, and I decided to stamp it with green ink, and I quickly am realizing that the ink pad is running out of ink, so I would just re-ink that. It's important to keep an ink pad juicy so you get good stamp impressions. That's much better. I still like the lighter version, so to get this you can also stamp the image twice with the same amount of ink, so you get a darker and a lighter version of the image. And that's a technique I use quite often on my work, just to create some depth and also it's kind of a different color. I'm doing that now. So you have kind of leaves that are a little bit hidden in the background, whilst the others are more at the foreground, and that just increases the depth of any work. It doesn't matter if it's abstract or if it's a more realistic scene. That's just a rule in art that things that are a little bit far away are not as saturated and clearly visible as things that are close to you. During this project, of course, I have a lot of drying times. I let that paint dry before I did the stamping. And you can use this in two ways. You can either just create that one sheet of paper throughout your day, maybe. Let's say you are at home, have to do some house cleaning, or you work from home, like I do. You just come to your desk once the layer is dry and add another layer, and then let that dry and come back. And you can create that throughout the day. Or you can just make a bunch of papers and just move them towards the side, let them dry, create another one in between, so you get a whole stack of papers in one go. I really like that cross stamp from the same stamp set because you can almost create a big pattern without having anything overlapping, and that's perfect to also make backgrounds or design papers for card making or other collage papers, of course. And here I also use that fact that I can stamp the image multiple times with just one time inking it. For the next step, I'm picking some gesso. I picked gesso instead of acrylic paint because it's a bit different than the acrylic paint, and that might give me different texture later in the process when I plan to go on top with acrylic inks. And it just applied purely with the dough scraper gives it also a different texture, and that just adds to the paper and gives depth and interest. And I also don't want to leave too many areas of that pure newsprint open, because that will soak up the ink and it will look dark in these areas compared to the ink over gesso, which will look more light, and the luminosity will be better. So I just mix everything up, and I really enjoy that process. It's kind of a messy process, but you don't have to think about too much. Just do whatever you feel is right. Here I decided to use that palette knife and apply the gesso so I get another texture. You could make color splatters with ink, with white acrylic ink, for example, and that will also then resist a next layer of ink a little bit, so they will pop through. That would also be a nice way of creating textures. Once I'm done with the gesso, I'm going to let that dry. Here I turn my paper around and just apply it in the other direction. It's always good, if you have a collage paper, to turn it around during the process, so it doesn't have that fixed way of being, so which is the top and the bottom. If you turn it around whilst creating, it will just be kind of a neutral kind of paper. I'm picking my Stabilo All pencil in black. And I think, yeah, I didn't have water on my desk because I recorded this after our holidays, and of course I put the water away whilst we were away, and I just added a little bit of water to that cap here with my spray bottle, so I can dip the nib into the water, and that will give me some more pigment and a darker line work. And I just scribble through the wet gesso and onto the paper. I changed my pencil into my left hand, which is my non-dominant hand, which makes the marks even more loose, so even looser. So it just, I don't have control, as much control as with the right hand. I just pop in some marks. Really, I do some really random stuff. In my next step, my paper is dry now. I'm going to stamp with some acrylic paint, and it's time now to bring in some color. And I'm into neon pink recently. I use it a lot, not only in mixed media, also when I do sketches and drawings in my sketchbook. It's one of my favorite colors at the moment. And I'm using that dotted stamp from also the Pencil Marks 8 stamp set. And I applied the paint to a jelly plate so I can easily use this as kind of an ink pad. Dip the stamp in and then stamp it. Stamping with acrylic paint is amazing, I think, because you get such a painterly and interesting look. Every image looks a bit different. It's perfect to make textures and patterns on a background. And also with the acrylic ink, you automatically have a waterproof image, and also it will resist watercolors a little bit and also acrylic inks a little bit, so it pops through when you layer up over the top. Again, I let that paint dry, and here I come back with even more stenciling. I'm using an olive green paint from Schminke, and I use it with a makeup sponge and just dab it through my dotted stencil to bring in even more pattern. I really love this color green. It's a really nice shade of green, and I really like that green and red pink mixture. They are complementary colors, and that just makes it interesting. And it's also a color combo I recently enjoy a lot. I let that dry again, and for my next layer, I'm using an Deco Art fluid acrylic paint, which is, I think, about not 10 years old, but maybe, and it's very hard already. That's what I've realized during my crafty, artsy past, that when you buy craft supplies or paints that are made from a crafting company, like the Deco Art media, you usually don't get the quality you will get with paints you buy from an artist art supplies brand, like let's say Della Rowney Schminke, Liquitex, and I have Schminke paints that are they are 30 years old, and they are still good. They are perfectly fine. But when you buy from a craft brand, the paint, it will not hold up to 10 years, I think. It will dry out. Yeah, I think that's the main reason that the paints dry out. I didn't like that radish mixture I made, so I just decided not to go for that. And instead, I'm picking acrylic ink that's from Amsterdam, the light, no, olivey yellow, I think. It's a very lovely, bright, light green with an olivey touch to it. And I just apply this with my brush and a little bit of water. And I try not to cover too much of my paper because I want to go in with another color. And what I also wanted to do is I want to leave some lighter areas. This is a cheap pipette bottle from Craftelier, and I usually use it to store some handmade or hand mixed watercolor inks. And I put in an acrylic ink from De La Rowney. That's the Antilope Brown, because I bought that in the big bottle, and I wanted to have it in a pipette bottle, but that does not work. It dries out. So yeah, I wanted to have a dark green, and that Antelope brown is I would say a yellowish brown, and I'm mixing it on the paper with a little bit of Payne's gray ink, which gives me a wonderful, wonderful, really dark green, and that gives me contrast. I needed something really dark on that paper to make everything interesting. That's what a painting or piece of art needs, for me, is a bit of contrast. It needs a wide tonal range, means you have a lot there, or everything from really dark to light, including mid-tones, and that's why I add in a really dark color, and I'm using that dark green mixture here, and I think that is perfect. As I said, I want to keep light areas, whites from that paper, because if you cover the whole sheet with paint or ink or whatever, it will look quite boring if you don't leave any white space. I mixed myself a red color, I would say apricot reddish color, kind of, using the fluid acrylics from De La Rowney. It's the System 3 acrylics, so it's the not crafty brand, it's their student grade paint. And I think I mixed crimson red together with magenta, and here I'm adding in a little bit of white acrylic ink to lighten that up, and I also add a little bit of yellow ink to make it look a bit less pinkish and more orangish. I'm also grabbing some water in between, which is right next to me on the right, to make some parts a bit thinner, and I try to work quickly, just to make sure I do not over control everything. Here I make some splatters, which I haven't done on this sheet yet, so it's another way of bringing in some different textures. As I said in the beginning, the white acrylic paint will resist the ink, and you can see that it's lighter in those areas. But what I do here is I'm picking a baby wipe, and I carefully remove some of the ink from the white textures from the acrylic paint with the stencils, and that makes them pop up even more, which just increases the interest. It brings in more highlights. Yeah, I really like this way of working because it's not a perfect texture over a color background. It's kind of a messy texture, which is not perfect, but I think a lot more interesting. Of course, I will use this paper on future projects. I'm not sure if I will post a project here as a video tutorial. We will see, but maybe you want to check out our shop blog, and over there I'm posting a lot of projects as well, often without a video tutorial, just with a little bit of an explanation what I've done, and there I'm definitely going to use this paper. This is also a really nice paper if you make handmade journals, handmade little chunky art journals. This is a really good paper for the inside pages. Here I'm making some more color splatters. I think I'm using black ink. Yes, I did. And I remember that I was a little bit afraid I'm spritzing the ink all over my desk and onto my clothes. Hopefully I didn't. I made some bigger and some smaller splatters. My paper was completely dry when I came back to it with a white Posca paint pen to do some botanical line drawings. And I'm using one of these fine liner Posca pens just because all the others I have in white were empty, and I just got some really light white watery ink out of them. And this is one that's working quite nicely. I definitely need to get myself a new one. I also decided to add some tiny dots into some areas. I will just skip that process now because it's just a bit boring making dots with a marker pen. I really like making dots in different sizes to create different patterns. Here you can see the finished paper. I hope you enjoyed this video and you found it inspirational. Check out my membership videos. There are a bunch already over on my channel. And thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Bye.